Today we're going to be talking about marriage analysis. Now, why do you need to know something about marriage analysis? Because if you don't understand what's really going on with this person and what the real problem is, are you going to be able to help them? And many times, particularly in marriages, this gets a lot more complicated because there are deeper things that are going on. In fact, we're going to have a whole nother session on problem marriages and just give you different models of different kind of problems that we run into constantly in marriages. But somehow you're going to have to get an idea in that first session usually as to what you're really dealing with, what is the presenting problem, and have an idea, be able to put it together at the end of the session and say, well, I think this is your problem, this is what I recommend we do to deal with that, and so on and so forth. And then if possible, even give them some sort of tools or something to begin to help them with that problem. So I'm going to go through a number of different tools that we have available to you, and then I'm going to put those together into a worksheet that we have available to you in the Principles for Life book that we use in that particular method, and it works very well for this. And then we're going to look at some other tests that we might want to be looking at more objectively. So let's start first with a 4-question marriage analysis. With these 4 questions, you can get a pretty good idea of what's going on in the marriage and how good or bad or what you're really dealing with just from these 4 questions. And the first question is, do you believe your mate has your best interest in mind? And to what degree or what percentage of the time? So I usually use a percentage here, and I'll say, well, do you think they have your best interest in mind 70% of the time? Or 50% of the time? Or 20% of the time? And I'll ask each of them about the other one and how they perceive this. I'll also explain this is a perception. You might totally disagree. In fact, what you're going to find out is you ask the one, to what degree do you believe the other one has their best interest in mind? And they'll say, 50%. You ask the person, to what degree do you believe you have their best interest? 100%. What do we have there? Communication problems that we've talked about, right? It happens over and over again. Now, why is this one critical? This is that magical line in marriage. If you're on the right side of this line, higher than 50%, you have a couple that believes their mate is still a friend, right? If it's less than 50%, you probably have a mate that sees their spouse as an enemy. This is the line between friends and enemies. And do we treat our friends and enemies slightly differently? See, if they're a friend, you give them the benefit of the doubt. Well, they must not have understood. Well, I see, it must have been some other reason because I know they're on my side, and you give a lot of grace and mercy, don't you? But if you don't believe they have your best interest in mind, then how do you act? You're never going to agree on anything because you know they're going to get you. Look at an example in history of that same thing. The Soviet Union. During the Cold War, to what degree did we believe they had our best interest in mind? About 0. What do you think they thought of us? About the same. And how many agreements did we really get on anything? Nothing. Why? If they had just said, you know what, we're just going to unilaterally destroy all our nuclear weapons, is that okay with you? We would have said no. Because we'd say they must have some new super weapon. There has to be some catch. They're out to get you, so there has to be some catch. So you're not going to agree to anything, are you? Let me tell you how bad this can get. I had a couple, and in session, this is the way it would work. I talked to one of them, and I would get them convinced that this was the best way to do it, right? So then I would talk to the other one, and the other one wouldn't agree at all. So I would talk to them for a while, and I finally got them to agree, then the first one wouldn't agree anymore. Because just by the fact that the other one wanted it meant they didn't want it. Why? Because they were convinced the other one was out to get them, and if the other one agreed to it, there must be some catch, right? So this is that night and day line. You'll be able to tell. If you have clients and they're really struggling and they get to the place they now believe the other one has their best interest in mind, you'll be able to tell how they act when they walk in. Everything will be different. And that's one of our main goals in marriage therapy, is to get them above that line. But this tells you where they're at, right? The next question comes from Ephesians chapter 5. It's a well-known question. I asked the lady, what percentage of the time do you feel that you're loved in this relationship? Notice what I'm saying. Their perception again. And they give me a perception of how much they feel loved in this relationship. Now, if I went to the maid and said, to what degree do you love them? What would they probably say? 100%. And then I go to the guy and I say, what degree or to what percentage do you feel respected and appreciated in this relationship? And the guy will give me a certain amount. And you see, this is that whole love and respect thing from your textbook that we're going to be talking about later, isn't it? And it's a critical issue, because a woman who is loved or feels loved will do anything for a man. And a man who feels respected and appreciated will do anything for a woman, right? Let me give you a little example from history. This is happening in like the 1800s. And there was a lady, and she was married to a particular man. And this man was a real controller, and back in these days you could get away with stuff like that. And he basically made her a list and said, you will draw my bath water at 6:30 in the morning, you will have breakfast on the table by 7 o'clock, you will do this, this, and this. So every moment of her day was programmed out of what she was to do in this relationship. How do you think she felt? Think she really felt loved? Nah. Anyway, that particular man died. And she ended up marrying another man, and she was happy and loved, and she just felt great in this relationship. And one day she was up in the attic, and she was going through her old stuff, and guess what she found? The list that the first husband had made. And she realized she was doing every single thing on that list for the second husband. But what was the difference? She felt loved in the second marriage, that he had her best interest in mind, and she didn't in the first. And that's how much of a difference this makes. And notice, everything is in perception, isn't it? We're not talking about reality. We're talking about perception. But perception just as well be your reality, because that's the way you're going to see it and the way you're going to act, isn't it? And next question I will ask them is, I'll usually say, now, don't change your mind based on what the other one says. In fact, I'll randomly call on you to tell me first, to get your number first. Rate your marriage on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being the worst marriage in the world, 10 being the best marriage in the world. And I'll point to one of them, they give me a rating, point to the other one. Because I'm trying to see if they're on the same page or if this is totally different, right? And my third question is the real mucky one. Rate your love life on a scale of 1 to 10. You know what's really interesting here? Sometimes you get the exact opposite of what you're going to think. You know, maybe you get good numbers for the first 3. Love life, man, they haven't been together for months. I mean, it's bad. Or you get the opposite. They give you lousy numbers here and they give you 10 for their love life. So sometimes that's all mixed in and sometimes it's not, and that's why you have to ask that question. But anyway, from those 4 questions, you can get a pretty good idea of what is going on, right? See the idea? Now, if they bring up anything about control or anything about domestic violence or abuse, I use a particular test that was taken out of a book, and it's called a CSR. And what a CSR is it asks them to rate particular things that have happened. It's called a CSR Abuse Index. And they rate particular things that have happened in their relationship. What's interesting about this is the numbers change later on, depending on how severe it is. But you rate them as frequency, sometimes, rarely, or never. I'll just read you a couple of them here. You get an idea of what we're talking about here. Does he ever discourage you from starting friendships with other women? And this, by the way, is for women, isn't it? See what I'm saying? Okay? And then you would rate that: frequently, sometimes, rarely, never. Does he ever accuse you of having affairs with other men or act suspiciously that you are? Again, frequently, sometimes, and so on. Is he disturbed by you working or by the thought of you working? See, all of these things, if someone's really trying to be in control, that's going to have an effect, right? Number 11, does he pressure you for sex much more often than you would like? And you go through all of these, and it comes up with a number. And the number you come up with is dangerously abusive, seriously abusive, or moderately abusive, or not abusive at all. And it just gives you an idea. What are we using that for? We want to find out if this person they're living with is really dangerous. And we have to go and help them get an escape plan and get all sorts of stuff put together because they are really in danger here. And this gives you a very good idea very rapidly of how controlling this relationship is. Now, is this affected by perceptions? I had a little interesting case one time when I used this. When they first came in, I had given the lady this particular test. And then later on, they had not seen each other for 6 months. So nothing had happened in the relationship for 6 months, right? And she came in and she was saying, now I see him for what he is. And I mean, she was really ragging on him, right? Now, let's do something. Would you fill out a CSR for me again? Now remember, this is supposed to be what really happened in the relationship, right? Guess what? In her perception on the second CSR, he was 10 points worse than he was when she saw him 6 months ago. What had happened? Her perception. See, we sort of gather evidence to support what we want to believe, don't we? So none of these tests that I'm giving you will stop that from happening. You have to realize these are their perceptions. That's what we're looking at. Doesn't mean that this all really is happening. Okay? The next thing we run into all the time is codependency. And you have two choices of trying to figure out how codependent a person is. The first one is you can go to the Love is a Choice workbook, and they have a little codependency test in there. And that's a real fast one. Or you can go to Transformation, is a whole assessment in the back of Transformation for the different 6 types of codependency. You can use that one also. But let's just look at a few questions and just see what we have there. And by the way, on this particular test, you're going to find that they're going to answer differently depending on the type of codependent that they are. As an example, number 7, I put work first above anything. If they're a codependent, dependent, are they going to say that? No. But if they're an independent, they're probably going to say they do. So this is, you're not scoring this, you're trying to just get an idea of where they're coming from. Another one that's really critical in this test is number 13. I am afraid that if others really knew me, they would run and hide. If somebody says that, what do you know about the people? They really feel bad about themselves, and they're going to really fear rejection because they see themselves as some real terrible person, and it also tells you what? They've got a good facade, don't they? Because they're not going to let you know. Of course, there's one here in 15. I cover up my feelings of self-doubt with drug or alcohol use. Because a lot of codependents, of course, are in relationships. The average codependent has 2 addictions. You're just seeing if those are the ones you're dealing with. So all these things do is give you a lot of additional information, right? That's all we're trying to do. Let's look at another one here. Let's look at depression. How are we going to tell if somebody is depressed? And here we're going to go to the depression workbook. And they have a little quiz in the depression workbook. Now, what are these all for? To help you gather additional data to understand what the presenting problem is and what is going on in the person's life. Do you use these all the time? No. You use these when something comes up and you need to have more information about it. Here are just some of the questions. I feel sad or discouraged more than I would like. It is easy to dwell on what might go wrong. I can be pessimistic. Socially, I would prefer to withdraw rather than to be in groups. And then some of the other key ones you want to look at down here are, my appetite has changed. I either eat too much or too little. Another one is, my sleep patterns have been irregular. Either I want to sleep too much or I cannot sleep enough. Those are some of the different keys that you're looking at, and it just gives you a nice little checklist here to see. Now, if they answer yes to all of these, you probably have clinical depression on your hands. If it's about halfway, they might be somewhat depressed. If they don't answer yes to many of these, you probably don't have someone that's very depressed. So to get the idea? How many of you remember the love bank we talked about last time? Well, Dr. Harley has a love bank inventory. I actually got this at one of his seminars many, many years ago at an AACC conference. This is probably the most volatile test there is to see where a couple is emotionally. So what I'll use this for is I'll give this when they initially come in, and then later on when they're doing better, I'll give them this test again, and they will, wow, do you see how much we've changed in the way we perceive our mate? And the idea of this one is, it has all these questions, and they're just to answer this on what's called a Likert scale, from -3 to +3. On each one of these things, you say, I don't want you to take a lot of time. I just hit them, and just what first comes to mind, just mark. And you just have a mark all the way through. Now, at the end of this particular test, it tells you to add them up, and if you come up with a certain number, they're still in love, and so on. That isn't very valid. I don't really use that, okay? What you're really looking for is patterns, aren't you? Now, what kind of patterns are you going to see on this? One of the big patterns is going to be if they say, I don't really want my mate to know about me. They're hiding. What do you think? They fear rejection. See the type of thing that's talking about here? Or I don't really have feelings for my mate. See, those kind of things. But based on what they say, you then ask additional questions. I'll give you an interesting one. I had a lady take this particular test, and she marked her husband -3 on every question on the entire test. So I, as a counselor, what do you think I was thinking? Man, this guy must not be doing anything for his wife, right? I mean, he never brings her flowers. He never says anything nice to her. He must be the worst ogre on the face of the earth for her to feel like this, right? I start asking the guy questions. He was doing 3 times for his wife what the average guy does. So I went to the wife and said, okay, let's figure this out a little bit. What does it mean to you if your husband brings you flowers? She says, oh, that's easy. He's manipulating me to get sex. So any positive thing he ever did, he got 0 points for. So he couldn't ever get any points in the entire relationship, and that's why his love bank was totally empty. It wasn't what he was doing, it's how she was interpreting what was going on. Do you see how that all works? So you've got to ask questions. These are just things to help you to ask questions. Now, the next thing we're talking about, I'm going to have to give you a lot more background and explain to you a lot more, because we do what's called an attachment analysis. If you don't know anything about attachment theory, you're going to learn in this session today. Now, I'm going to briefly go over this, but I want you to understand some things. Now, where did the idea of attachment theory come from? Well, initially in the 1950s, there was a sanatorium. Sanatoriums are where they took people that had tuberculosis, but this one was for kids. And this doctor started noticing something about the kids that were brought there, because the parents would come drop their kids off, and the kids had to stay there for months to keep them isolated from the rest of the community so they wouldn't pass on tuberculosis to other people. And they were allowed to come and visit them on the weekends. And he said he noticed a pattern. That when the kids, first when their parents left, what do you think the kids did? Threw a temper tantrum, tried to follow their parents. And then after a while, they would just lay in their bed and stare off into space, not play with the other kids, not talk to the nurses or the doctors or anything. And so he called that despair. First he called protest, then despair. And then it seemed like the kids were okay. They'd get up and finally start playing with the toys and start doing other things. But what's interesting is that when the parents came back, the kids wanted nothing to do with them. They had detached. And see, one of the things you're going to see quite often in your marriage counseling is detachment. What is it telling you? That that person doesn't feel safe in the relationship. And so they are no longer emotionally attached. The way you'll usually hear that is it'll usually be the wife, and this is what she'll say. I love him, but I'm no longer in love with him. See, she sees him as unsafe due to all the offenses, due to the things that are piled up. She's reached the conclusion he no longer has my best interest in mind, and therefore she has emotionally detached to protect herself. You see that? Now, what's interesting about this is that actually there's a very good theory called attachment theory about this. And they did some more research. And in this research, they took a doctor's office, sort of like a counseling office, and they brought a small kid in, like 3 years old, 4 years old, something like that, and with their mom, and they'd have a stranger sitting in the room, and then the doctor and nurse would come and get mom. And they watched how the kid would react when mom would leave. And they got some different reactions, and then they would watch what happened when mom came back. And from this, they came up with a total of 4 different attachment styles. And it turns out these attachment styles go through your life, and they have an effect. And so many times when you're dealing in marriage counseling, if you understand the attachment styles, you can actually almost predict how the people are acting in the marriage and why they're acting that way in the marriage. And most people don't have an idea even what's going on. You get your attachment style much younger than this, like 1 to 2 years old. Based on what's going on in your life, you get an attachment style. And it's sort of like this. You go out and you skin your knee, and you come running to mommy, this little kid, right? And mommy says, I'm busy. Take care of yourself. Or mommy says, oh, let me kiss your owie. Oh, isn't this, and gives you a big hug. Well, what are you doing? You're getting a different reaction about people in life, and you reach 2 conclusions about life. And these 2 conclusions are absolutely critical as to how you deal with attachments in the rest of your life. The first conclusion is, am I lovable and capable of receiving love? Am I okay? The second conclusion is, are other people safe? Can I trust them to love me and meet my needs if I need them? And those are the 2 critical questions. Am I okay? Are you okay? So going back to this experiment, they have the kids, and as the mother leaves, the first one we're going to call a secure attacher. What secure attachers do is when mom leaves, they want to follow mom and they cry. And when mom comes back, they just run over to mom, and mom picks them up. And because they're secure, they're perfectly happy in a few seconds. They just hang on to mom and cling on to mom, and she gives them a hug, and they're all fine, and they walk out the door, and everything's fine. What does that one believe? I'm okay, mom's okay. Everything is secure in life. The next one we're going to call an ambivalent attacher. The ambivalent attacher acts just like the secure attacher when mom leaves. Sort of throws a temper tantrum and so on and wants to follow mom and cries. But when mom comes back and they run to mom and mom picks them up, they don't settle down. They're always twisting around or doing something or trying to do something, trying to perform. Because see, this one believes that mom is okay, but they're not unless they perform. So do you know anyone that has performance self-worth? Do you know anyone who is actually trying to chase other people and trying to get them to love them? They'll try to perform and perform and perform in the relationship. You've got an ambivalent attacher. Because if they do well enough, then they're going to be loved, right? But if they don't perform well enough, then they're not going to be loved. And what are their emotions going to look like? Based on how they perceive the other person. Just an aside, an interesting thing is these attachment styles lead directly to the different types of codependency. So what do we have here? A codependent dependent, don't we? This dependent, they're trying to get their needs met and trying to feel okay about themselves. Then we have the next one. Now this one was a very interesting one because when mom leaves, the kid doesn't react at all, doesn't even notice. And when mom comes back, the kid doesn't seem to notice. In fact, the kid just keeps playing with whatever he's got and he just sort of takes care of himself. What does this one believe? Mom is not safe. I have to take care of myself. We call this an avoidant attacher. These people show very little emotion no matter what happens, and they attach very lightly. When you have people come in, well, we don't have an intimate relationship. It's like we're two roommates in the same house. You might have an avoidant attacher or two avoidant attachers because, see, they're afraid to attach. They believe the other people are not safe. You can't trust anyone because that's what they experienced growing up. But they can trust themselves. And so they are responsible. They usually will perform, do things. Well, the first one is really performing to get approval. This one is performing to make themselves feel good about themselves. And finally, we have what's called a disorganized attacher. This is the one that really confused the researchers. Because although this kid, will cry when mom leaves and so on, usually, you never know what's going to happen. Because, see, this is the kid that was, when they ran to mommy, they didn't know whether mommy was going to throw him across the room, give him a spanking, or give him a big hug. So this kid believes, mommy is not safe, and I'm not good enough. So I can't trust mommy, and I can't trust me. So what am I going to do? You don't know. This kid, sometimes when mommy came back, would hit mommy. Or they would run out the door. Or they would run to the stranger. Or they would cling to mommy and not let go. What this type of attacher tends to do is oscillate between the ambivalent, wanting approval and so on if they think mommy is safe at this moment, or the avoidant if they think mommy is not safe at this moment. And so they can change back and forth within minutes in a relationship. And they're extremely emotional. Many times they're even suicidal. But emotions are all over the place. And if you have one of these people you're married to, you're never going to have a clue what's going to happen. You might come home and you might think things are fine and it's a disaster. And 3 minutes later it's okay. And 10 minutes later it's disaster again. Emotionally, they're all over the place because they're not okay and you're not okay, so you can't trust anybody, so what in the world are you going to do? Who knows? To see the problem? Now, we have very good models for this in the Bible. We're not going to go into this. If you remember the model, I believe it was in Faith Therapy and talked about love. And it was the model of David. Which attacher was he? The ambivalent attacher. Remember, he's even chasing Saul after Saul's killing him all the time and spares Saul's life twice, and he's still trying to get Saul's approval, right? And what was Saul? Saul is a disorganized one. He's throwing javelins at people, and he's telling them how great they are the next day. And then we had Michal, David's wife. She's the avoidant attacher. And then we had Jonathan, who is a secure attacher. By the way, how do we change attachment styles? Well, we change them by our relationship with God. Could we all agree that God is the only safe person in the universe? That will always be there for us, will never lie to us, and is totally emotionally sensitive to us at all times. So we have this whole thing going on. One other piece to attachment theory is that attachments are like thermostats. You have a range. If in your range you feel the person is getting too close to you, you say something or do something or have a fight or something to get distance. If you feel the person is too far away from you, your attachment alarm goes off and you say you're never here anymore, right? What's interesting is people have different thermostat settings, don't they? So what happens if you have a couple and their thermostats look like this? They're only going to be happy in this range right here. So you're going to have to help them deal with this and come up with some boundaries and some agreements of how much time they spend together. Otherwise, one is going to either feel smothered or the other one's going to feel abandoned, and we have all sorts of issues going on. So do you see, this model is a whole different way of looking at relationships, isn't it? And for certain clients, it's going to fit the best, and you're going to be able to help them the best in this particular area and in what is going on here. Now what I want to bring to your attention is what we call a client problem assessment form. And this comes out of our book, Principles for Life. And what we've done here is in that book we tried to simplify things for you in making these different plans and doing this analysis here. And so what you have is an entire form here that will go through my normal method of analysis and help you gather the information. So the first thing you're going to do when somebody comes in, after you get who they are and so on and so forth, you're going to ask them, what's the problem, right? And what are they going to say? Well, many times they don't know. So one of the things I'll ask is, okay, I'll say, you know, people usually don't come to pay me. If they haven't just had some major crisis, they will put off coming to a counselor forever until there's some crisis, something has gone wrong, that is really wrong, that really has them concerned. So what was the crisis that happened to you to get you to come? And then usually I'll get the story. And then we'll be able to find out why they're really here and what they really want to happen, right? And I'll ask them more questions about that. And as I ask them these questions, I'm looking for certain things. And if something comes up like codependency, let's say they had a drug alcohol problem in their family they grew up in, or depression, or domestic violence, that's what those different assessments or tests that I gave you earlier are all about. They're used in this particular place. Do you see that? So these are the things I'm looking for, and if they are, I just check them there. This first little paragraph that you see on your sheet sort of goes through all of the major things that I want to know about, or be major in a marriage that's going to tell me what kind of problems we're dealing with. See, do they have conflict? Do they have parenting problems? Are they a blended family? Do they have family issues, unforgiveness from their family of origin? How about anger problems, verbal abuse, domestic violence? I asked for the worst incident there because I'll give you an idea. You know, was this person hospitalized? Or, you know, are they just talking that somebody got slapped or something? What was going on there? Drug alcohol abuse, pornography, sexual addiction, rape, incest, homosexuality, other sexual problems, affairs. How often do they have sex? I'm giving you an idea. What's the bell curve there? Mean is 2.5 days. If it's outside of 1 week, you probably have a problem. Other abuse, trauma, sickness, or abortions. Codependency. Divorce or separation. Grief or loss. Depression, bipolar. Are they suicidal? Do they have a plan? Emotional problems, low self-worth, driven, pride, financial problems. If there's something else that comes up, I got a little one that just says other. So that's the first thing. You're getting a picture of the presenting problem, right? The second thing is you want to look at their family of origin. And the first thing is, which child are they out of how many children? Why do you want to know that? What if they're both first children? What do we automatically know? We have head-to-head conflict, aren't we? See, what if they were the baby out of 12? What do we know? Someone's going to probably feel that they weren't very well taken care of, or they had to work to get attention. All these things have an effect on people, don't they? Then describe the father. Was he abusive? Was he a controller? And a big one, could the child meet the parents' expectations? Then describe the mother. What was she like? In the back of your head, you're saying, okay, was this a codependent relationship? What is going on here? Was the mom passive and the dad was my way or the highway? What's going on and how is that going to affect them? Was there a divorce? What age were they when they were divorced? With whom did they live? Did they have a stepfather or stepmother? Were they abusive, controller? Did the child meet their expectations? Then how about family life? This can cover almost anything. There are all sorts of different things in family life. One of the things is, were one of the kids favored over another kid? Were they beaten up? Were they spanked heavily? Did they feel the approval? Was it a loving family? What was going on there? School performance. Were they an average student or were they a 4.0? If they were a 4.0, what are you going to guess? Possibly codependency. They may just be brilliant, but maybe not. Sports. These all affect what? Their self-worth, how they feel about themselves. It shouldn't, but it does. Describe their relationships. Are all their relationships totally chaotic messes? Is their life like a soap opera? Did their parents beat each other up? Did the kids beat each other up? What was going on in this family? What am I doing? Do you see? I'm painting a whole picture of what is going on here. I'm as many pieces of the puzzle as I can put together to make sense out of this whole thing. Were there any physical or health problems? See, if the mom was sick all the time, what am I going to guess? One of the girls probably took over as surrogate mom and had to bring up the other kids. They may not even had a childhood. But you're going to ask more questions, but this gives you an idea of what things to really look at. And of course, we do this then for the other spouse, right? Then we do a spiritual assessment. Why do we want a spiritual assessment? We want to find out if they're saved. We want to find out how much they can rely on God so we know where we're at on things. Are they saved? How long? Are they baptized? How much do they know their Bible? Do they actually do the spiritual disciplines? How strong are they in the things of God? Do they attend church? What church? Why am I asking that? Different denominations are very different, and you get an overall picture probably of how they see God and how they see things just by what church they're going to. How involved are they? Do they study their Bible? Then how about this one? Involved in other religions or occult or New Age. Why am I asking that? Big red flag. Maybe we have some spirit problems here that are involved that we're going to have to deal with. Okay, after we get the spiritual assessment, then we do an attachment assessment. And we ask them those questions that we were talking about. When you were growing up, how did you see other people? Were they there for you? You could just go home no matter what you did, you were just loved and accepted, or were they not there for you? Did they not meet your needs? Were you living in poverty? Were your parents working all the time? You're trying to find out what? Were you able to trust other people? And then, how did you see yourself? Were you worthwhile? Were you lovable? Did everyone sort of just love you and care for you? And from those two questions, what do? You select which attachment style. Are they secure? Are they avoidant? Are they ambivalent? Are they disorganized? Then you give the additional tests or assessments that you need on the things that you came up with to tie it down a little bit more. Then you fill in the counselor's evaluation of the problem. And then you come up with a treatment plan of what you think you're going to do, just your guests from the first session. And you're going to say, well, we have this available, we think you ought to go to codependency support group. We have this book we can help you with, and so on and so forth. And this is what we can do for you. So you get the whole idea how you can take a marriage or a family and you can sort it out by asking these different kind of questions. Of course, the ones that don't apply, you don't mark and you don't have to follow further, right? But the ones that you do, you sort of like a dog on the trail, you sniff around, you know, and you find things and you ask questions until you come up with an understanding of what is going on, and you're coming up with a hypothesis. Your guess of what's going wrong in this marriage that needs to be dealt with. And that's what you're trying to do. Now we use one other thing sometimes, and we use this a lot in premarital. In fact, in this church, you can't be married without taking this test. And this test is called Prepare Enrich. The Prepare test is the test that you use if the person has never been married before. There's a Prepare MC, that is if they're married with children before, and then Enrich is if the person is already married. And this, why would we use this? To get an objective assessment. And this is a broad brush picture of the entire marriage. Usually by just taking this test, you can look at the data, and from the data ask the right questions to figure out what is going on in the marriage and what is happening and why is this all happening. What's interesting about this test is that it's between 80 to 85% predictive of how the marriage will turn out. Now, we don't use it for prediction, but we use it to get at least people an idea of this is a disaster waiting to happen. If you're dumb enough to marry this person, you're going to need a lot of counseling before you get married, because we got some really major problems here. Do you see what I'm saying? Or you might say, no, it looks fairly good. Now, how do we do that? And let's see what the test basically covers and what's going on here. First thing does, it gives you some background information. That's just like a checklist. It asks about abuse, it asks drug, alcohol, it asks other things like that, and from that you just look at that. And you just say, ask them more questions about their family. You know, was there abuse in your family? Is the mate pregnant? It has all those kind of questions on there, which are just little red flags. So you look for red flags to start with. Then the second part of this, and it's changed a lot over the years. It's been around a long time. So now the computer actually gives you all the answers, which is sort of nice. The first one that we really deal with is what's called personality assessment. And it tells you how assertive, how self-confident, how avoidant, how much partner dominance is in this relationship. This particular part of it is 50 to 77% reliable. They actually tested this on 2,766 people. In all cases that I have ever used this test, the people said, yeah, that's us. And the test is good enough that it just tells you what's going on. See, what if you have one and the male is very dominant and the female is very avoidant? What's that going to tell you? Watch out. What kind of relationship do we have here? What's going on? So it gives you an idea starting with all of that. Then it gives you a couple type. And these are the different couple types. Vitalized couple types are the ones that have the most strengths. Then harmonious, they usually have fewer children, but family and friends and religion are important. Traditional, this is less communication, usually bad conflict resolution, sexual relationship. Conflicted, which is weakness in most areas, and devitalized, which is the worst. What's interesting about this is they have statistics between happy, unhappy, and divorced and separated. Just to give you an idea here, of vitalized couples, 60% turned out to be happy, 23% turned out to be unhappy, and 17% divorced. Let's jump down here at conflicted couples. 17% are happy, 30% are unhappy, and 49% were separated or divorced. So all this gives you information. But that's not the main part of the Prepare Enrich assessment. The main part is 15 different areas in which they look to see if they're in agreement, they're in disagreement, or it's a special interest item, or you don't know whether they're in agreement or disagreement. And these areas are, you don't have to get this all down, but I'll give you an idea. Marital expectations. Now, why do we want that? Because it can bias the entire test. How many people before they get married, or their head is high up in the sky and they think they're the only ones who are going to have the perfect marriage and it's going to be easy, right? So if that's the case, they actually look at your scores and they actually give you corrected scores throughout the test, because they know, if this person's, clear up in the sky, they're ignoring all their problems. And how are they going to answer these questions? Ignoring most of the problems, right? Or if they're very negative, it gives you an idea how realistic this is. Then we have personality issues. Are there particular things that bother them about their mate? Communication. How well do they communicate? Does one of them just shut down? Conflict resolution. To what degree can they solve their problems when they come up? Financial management. How secure are they that this new family or their current family can make it financially? Leisure activities. Do they like to do the same things? Sexual relationship. What are their expectations? Children or parenting. What do they believe about that? Family or friends. Do they get along with the family and friends? Role relationship. Spiritual beliefs. And then they have something they call couple closeness, family closeness, couple flexibility, and family flexibility, and they actually plot that. And when they plot that, that's really a measure of what? Flexibility versus closeness. It's really a measure of codependency. And it'll show you where the family of origin is and where the current relationship is. And the closer you are to the center of this diagram, the more healthy it is, and the farther you are to the outside of this diagram, the more unhealthy it is. So it gives you all of those ideas. But from the bottom line to the whole thing, what do? We take some research, and we let them compare some notes of what their numbers are, and where they get a number which is an agreement score. It's like 10, 20, 50, 90, of how much they agree in each one of these 15 areas. And then we compare that to the research. And this is what the research looks like to give you an idea where the numbers are. Realistic expectations, or those marital expectations, satisfied married people had a 48 or higher, where divorced had a 32 or lower. Personality issues, of 47 were satisfied, 37 were dissatisfied, 30s and below tended to cancel their relationships and never get married. Separated was 25, divorced again was 30 and below. Then communication was 62, conflict resolution 63, religious orientation 58. And I gave you those 5 because those 5 are the most predictive as to how the marriage will turn out. Now, we don't add them all up in some score, but guess what? If every one of their scores they had in those areas are all below those numbers, what do we know? This marriage probably isn't going to make it, right? And what if every one of those is higher than the happily married scores? We probably have a pretty good idea this is going to make it, don't we? And in between, it's a toss-up. How do we use this? We say, look, these are what the scores look like. This is what the computer's telling you and what this test is telling you. Now let's identify where the problem areas are in your marriage, and let's deal with those in counseling and try to see if we can resolve those so you can have a high probability that your relationship is going to work. Do you see how we use this? But within one session, we can usually come up with what the real issues are that need to be addressed, and we can tell the people. Now, do we tell them, no, you can't get married? No, but I had a couple one time, I said, you got major problems here. I said, well, we'll get married and we'll come back to you afterwards. They did. They're still struggling with their marriage, by the way. I still see them from time to time. Hopefully they're going to make it eventually. But we have those different issues that come up, and you at least have identified those issues to them, and then you set them free to decide how much help they really want to get. Do you see the picture? We've talked about a lot of different things you can do to gather information, but you as the counselor have got to gather that information, use your experience to put all the pieces together to reach some conclusions so you know what the problem is, so then you can come up with solutions that are going to help with that particular problem. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you, Lord, that you have made us great and wonderful, and you have a wonderful plan for our lives and for our marriages. And we ask, Lord, that you would give us the wisdom to put those pieces together, to ask the right questions, that we could truly help other people. In Jesus' name, amen.